don't be afraid to fail. Failure is not a bad thing if you learn from it. If you continually fail at the same thing over and over, it's a definition of stupidity. But if you're learning and you're making those changes, there's nothing wrong with going out there and failing.
Hi friends, this is Read and Write with Natasha podcast. My name is Natasha Tynes and I'm an author and a journalist. In this channel, I talk about the writing life, review books, and interview authors. Hope you enjoy the journey. Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Read and Write with Natasha. I have with me today Dr. Josh McConkey, who's a best-selling author, emergency physician, and military leader with over 22 years of service. He's a devoted father and advocate for leadership. His book, Be the Weight Behind the Spear, inspires Americans to support the nation's future leaders, reflecting his dedication to community, education, and family. So, Dr. Josh, so happy to have you with me here today, and thank you for joining me. And so, Dr. Josh, the first question for me is about your book, Be the Weight Behind the Spear. What is the meaning behind the title, and what is the book exactly about?
Well, Natasha, first off, thanks for having me on the show. The title of the book, I worked with some special operators in the past, the tip of the spear. When you talk about individuals, they were, jumping out of helicopters, rescuing, the Thai children in the cave systems in 2018. Do you remember those kids that were trapped in that cave?
Yeah, I remember. Yeah. In Chile?
It was in Thailand. It was in Thailand.
In Thailand. Yeah,
Yes.
That's true. Yeah.
And
yeah.
So I can't do those things. I save lives. I don't take them. I'm a doctor. But I can be the weight behind the spear. So the title of the book really comes from the best resource that we have in this country. That's our people, coaches, teachers, volunteers, and families. That's the weight behind the spear of all of our heroes, police officers, firefighters, first responders, military. So I want more Americans to engage their communities, and starting right in your own community, be the weight behind the spear is my call to action for Americans.
So how did your work as a physician influence, or you worked at the ER, correct?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
How did that influence your book or influence your life in general and your writing?
So as an emergency physician, I'm an adrenaline junkie, number one. So that's why I chose emergency medicine. A lot of the trauma, a lot of the military things that I've done, international medicine as well. But after doing this job for 22 years now, I have just seen in the last several years an increase in mental health crisis in this country. So particularly the younger generation of Americans, where I see so much anxiety and depression and seeing more suicides, it gets to you. I mean, when you sit down with a family and you have to tell them that their loved one, their son, their daughter, or their parent, has died, it really rips your heart out. And I decided that I needed to do more. So, I mean, I can save a lot of lives in the emergency department. I can't save everybody, but I need to get involved more and try to prevent these issues before they become this problem. So getting involved and writing the book, it's really attacking the problem that I see in America with the mental health crisis, and we need to build this generation up.
So why do you think this generation, I'm assuming it's the Gen Z generation, why do you think they suffer from a mental health crisis as opposed, let's say, to, I don't know, baby boomers or Gen Xers, or what was the shift?
So I think the biggest shift that you've seen is this is the generation that has not ever lived life without an iPhone, without instantaneous information at their fingertips, and that connectedness that they have with social media that's out there, just 24/7. They just have lived a much different world than, like my generation. I'm 47. I'm not an old guy by any means, but, I was not raised on social media, and I didn't have an iPhone for the longest time. I didn't have a cell phone until, it must have been the 2002 or 3. It's been a long time. But that basically their whole development, even when they talk with one another. I mean, they text. It's all, FaceTime, Facebook, Twitter and X, and just their form of communication. I just noticed as a military commander as well. I've got a lot of these 18 to 25-year-old individuals, and they just the basic communication skills have kind of lacked just because they've kind of grown up in a different environment. And then you take COVID, right? So you just take 2 to 3 years that are really critical in their development, right? Like middle school, high school, early college, and you just shut them out of society. So you shut them out of their schools, you shut them out of their churches, and they already had some of these communication problems anyways. You just compounded that exponentially during COVID. And so now this is the group of individuals that are out there, in college looking for work, joining the workforce, that just lack some really basic communication skills and resiliency. So they, I don't want to bash on this generation. They've got lots of positives as well. But boy, I tell you, as an emergency doctor, what I see in the ER and then what I see as a commander for these kids, there's definitely a problem that needs to be addressed. And that was really the whole purpose of writing the book.
So there's I'm a mom of 2 Gen Z. So
I've got 3.
I've got 3. So they get a lot of slack as well and criticism for not having good work ethics, as opposed to, let's say, Gen Xers and others. Do you agree with that? Like, every time I hear that when somebody hires a Gen Z, they always ask for a mental health day. They get triggered easy. I'm just the messenger here. Don't shoot me.
Yeah.
So they get triggered easily. All of that. And do you agree with the statement? Or is it the older generation just being jealous of the younger generation?
Well, it's always the older generations. Like, hey, back in my day.
Exactly. Yeah.
But there is definitely a tendency, and as a business owner, I've seen it as well. They quit at a moment's notice. They don't deal well with any stressful. Well, I won't say any. They don't deal as well with stressful situations. They lack resiliency. And when you sit them down and you talk to them, I literally had a front desk secretary who had something kind of pop up, and she's like, "Hey, I'm going to quit. I need to go do this or this." And I talked to her and say, "Hey, listen, just as a professional, can you give us at least a 2-week notice? Just give us 2-week notice. We need to find a replacement for you." And she's like, "Well, I don't know. I think I just want to quit today." Well, if you do that, I can't give you a letter of reference. Oh, that's okay. I probably won't need it anyway. So she bails. And then 6 months later, she comes back and asks for her job back. And I said, well, number one, I can't give you a letter of recommendation for some other jobs she was looking at. I mean, you couldn't even give us 2-week notice. It was really unprofessional. And then she asked for her job back and just pretend like there was no problem at all. Like, listen, you didn't even give us a 2-week notice. Like, no, I'm not going to give you your job back. So it's very unique. It's a unique challenge for business owners and leaders and just community, members, teachers as well. My wife's a teacher. My mom and my aunt were teachers as well, just retired. And this generation, we've got some work to do.
So are you worried? I mean, this is the generation is going to be, the new leaders, the new CEOs, the new presidents. How bleak is the future?
Well, I'm so concerned that I wrote a book. It's the first book that I've written, and as a commander and as an emergency doctor, I have plenty of things to keep me busy. But I felt strongly enough about this that I wrote a book, and I've diagnosed the problem, and here's the prescription to treat it. So I'm trying.
What is the prescription to treat it?
Getting involved as early as possible. So it could be it can mean something different for everybody. Like, everybody has special gifts. All right. Some people just love animals. Like, they go volunteer at the animal shelter. That animal can become an emotional support animal for somebody. Some people love music, get out there and share your music with your world. Like, music can be very powerful. The arts, like for me, I coached. So I did Little League T-ball and some baseball with my kids when they were growing up, and then coached soccer as well, or volunteer in your schools or your churches. There's so many different nonprofit organizations out there as well. I've started a nonprofit organization, the Weight Behind the Spear Foundation. trying to take this book to the next level and get out there for community action, promote volunteerism, and really, right now we're helping Western North Carolina, had a lot of destruction from Hurricane Helene. There's so many opportunities to get out there. Everybody has something to give. So that's how you start. The business leaders, the more business leaders that I've talked with, this is your problem, whether you know it or not, and most of them know it by now. You're hiring these kids. You're working with these kids. You're trying to train this generation. Getting involved when they're younger, just like coaching a baseball team or soccer, and just instill some of these skills before they get to you, you're much better off the earlier you start.
So you're saying by them volunteering or doing community work, they would be prepared for the real world. Is that where you're going? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So the more that you can teach accountability and ownership and just resiliency, there is a tendency in some of the parents in the younger generations here. You've heard of the helicopter parents, and they're just they're just hovering all the time. And now you see more lawnmower parents, where it doesn't do the child any good by removing every obstacle in their path. That doesn't help them. That in fact hurts them, because they don't know how to overcome those obstacles later in life when you're not there to mow that lawn in front of them. I've got 3 kids of my own. So my oldest will be 14 here in January. I've got twin 12-year-olds, and I'm not a perfect parent by any means, but I know we're working the best that we can to try to prepare our children for success, and letting them make some mistakes. Just very simple things. So if you have children or you're part of a family, and everyone has a family, make that time to just sit down and have some family dinner. Sounds real easy, sounds real simple. Just find that time a couple of times a week, 3-4 days a week. Just sit down, have family dinner, slow things down. It lets your kids know that, number one, that they're important enough for you to take that time. And then you ask them about their day, simple things like what went well, what didn't go well. Could you have made some different decisions in that day and it would have affected the outcome? That's how they learn. They have to make those mistakes, but they know they can come home and they can talk with their parents, and in a very caring environment. It helps promote their own independence. It builds, their personal well-being, like who they are as a person, and it just helps build confidence for them to go out there and tackle some things. And don't be afraid to fail. Failure is not a bad thing if you learn from it. If you continually fail at the same thing over and over, that's a definition of stupidity. But if you're learning and you're making those changes, there's nothing wrong with going out there and failing.
And how would that make them more resilient?
So learning how to, recognize when you've made mistakes, or when you can't control everyone around you. You can only control yourself. There's just kind of some mean, nasty people out there. My business in 2018, I owned a freestanding emergency department, and the CEO was just a very, very not nice individual. Well, we hired a forensic accountant. We found a bunch of money that he was embezzling. He just doing all kinds of, bottom line, he did lots and lots of nasty things. I lost $5 million. And I take ownership of that. Hey, listen, I didn't vet him enough. Don't get into business with people that you don't trust 100%. And then the big lesson was, don't be a minority shareholder in Texas unless you really trust your business partner. So he was a majority shareholder, tried to bankrupt us. He did a lot of mean, nasty, nasty things. But, if I didn't have some resiliency skills and like my family, my faith, and friends, and I just all I cared about was money, I would have been in a really bad situation there. But you have to learn how to overcome things. And life is not a happy, shiny place. I've served in the military as well. I've seen a lot of horrible, terrible things, death and destruction. And it took me a while to recover after I served in Iraq. It was really hard. But those resiliency skills are very, very important. And you don't know how to respond to those situations unless you've had other situations to compare that to. So if you don't give your children any adversity and let them make mistakes, a lot of them are going to crumble.
Okay. So I'm not sure if you heard about there's this news last week. So Australia banned social media use for people under 16, I think. And so they just signed this into law. So anybody who's in Australia who's under 16 cannot use social media.
Yeah, we lived in Australia. We were there in 2020, 2021. We were in Adelaide, so I still have a lot of friends and colleagues down there. And the American Academy of Pediatrics is very clear. Social media use for children below 16 is very detrimental to their development. Just when like every little ping, every ding, those the brain isn't really set up to deal with that type of dopamine stimulation. So under age 16 for sure, some even raising that age to 18. Now, I'm not a real big fan of like federal government intervention, kind of telling parents how they should or shouldn't, be parenting. I think that's probably better left to parents to make that decision. My kids don't have social media, and they will not be having social media probably until they're out of the house. We'll probably expose them some with just some of ours so they understand it, but it's not really safe for their development. But I don't know if the best answer is having the governments make that decision for you. There's some parental decisions.
Okay, so I'm gonna just play the devil's advocate and talk from the perspective of the kids.
Mm-hmm.
So the kids these days, they don't talk via text. Most of them sends DMs via Snapchat or Face or Instagram. See, these are so even if they're not on social media, this is how they interact is through. So if we cut all social media from some of them, aren't you worried that they might feel isolated from the rest of their friends community? Because like this is how they plan their outings, this is how they interact, this is how, while in the past, like I grew up in the 80s, we used to go play outside and this is how they have these conversations via DMs, via Snapchat, via whatever. So isolating them from this kind of social interaction, would it also have an effect on them, because we're kind of rejecting the communications tool of the day by
that is certainly a great point, and I know I've talked with my pediatrician for our children about those, and so that sense of connectedness, I mean, that's their perception is their reality, right? So the big question would be, what do you define as social media?
Correct.
I mean, is the cell phone and FaceTime, is that social media now? I mean, so whatever they're using to communicate with one another, I mean, does that fall under the realm of whatever law they set in Australia? I don't know. I haven't physically read that law yet. When you isolate them completely, that's only going to further exacerbate the anxiety, the depression, and those mental health issues. So you need to have. It's different than my generation, but that's their generation's communication tool. So I don't know if you can lump some of those just communication tools into social media.
Yeah.
Is it where do you draw the line? That's why when governments get involved and start doing things like that, well, who's defining it and who's making that decision?
Yeah.
I would much rather that be the parent than some federal administrator somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, that's like, because for our kids, we have like a certain restrictions on their phone, time,
we do the timeouts.
the app, the timeouts, all of that. And every once in a while they ask for like more time, and we either have to.
Our kids at 4:30 are just waiting. Like just the clock is ticking. Like, oh, it's 4:30. We can start talking with our friends and things again. But we've been. We just got off a Thanksgiving break, so they had the overload of the iPad, so it's time to get back to school.
Exactly. So, I mean, these are one of the things that I grapple with is the same discussion we have about AI, and we're scared of AI, but at the same thing is, when electricity was invented, people were scared of electricity. Like there's this story of U.S. president, I forgot his name. He was too scared to turn on and off the lights. So he would ask his staff to do that because the worry of being electrocuted, right? So I think it's a line that we have to tread carefully, whether to ban it completely and then kind of isolate them completely from the social interaction, the social growth, and also the dangers that come with it. Is like, and as parents and educators, how do you think we should maneuver this kind of tricky situation?
Yeah, those are just questions that are best answered by the parent.
Yeah.
I don't generally want the federal government telling me much of anything. I'm not a big fan of the federal government telling people what to do.
All right. Yep, North Carolina, of course. All right. So, okay. So the book. How did you publish the book? What was your publishing journey like?
Yeah, I had started from zero, knew absolutely
Okay.
nothing, and used Wisdom House Publishers. They're a hybrid publishing company in Chapel Hill, and so
Okay.
they kind of walked me through that. But it was kind of self-publishing / hybrid publishing on that, and then they just with the marketing and boy, the editing. I had a lot to learn. I'm a good writer. It could always be better, but the editors did a fantastic job.
Okay.
So I had 2 great editors for that book. So just learning that process, yeah, it was a very cool learning process.
How long did it take you to finish the book? And what was your writing routine like?
So it took me about 1.5 years, from start to finish, and then editing after that. And for me, I travel a lot for work as an emergency physician. So when I travel was the time where I would be writing the most. At home, things are pretty hectic. During the day, I mean, when the kids are at school, I can certainly get some things done. I'm working on a screenplay and I have some ideas on some children's books right now. But it's hard to get things done when I'm at home. There's just too much to do. So a lot of my work was done on the road. So I traveled for the military. I traveled as an emergency physician. And I did most of my writing when it was kind of quiet and by myself. I felt that was my best writing.
And so what are you working on? You mentioned a screenplay. Can you tell us a bit about it?
Yeah. No, I have a fun screenplay right now. It's I don't want to talk too much about it, trying to keep that under wraps. And then with the children's book, I'm working on turning this book into a children's book series. How do you talk with children about integrity and accountability and leadership? Well, we're just going to break them down. Each of those will get their own book, and we'll talk about it. Get some fun illustrations, and I think that there's a good market out there for that. I think a lot of parents really struggle on how they teach some of those simple skills to their kids, and hopefully this is something that will help.
And what made you decide to become an author? I mean, you're a doctor. You serve in the army. How did you kind of switch your mindset to become an author? What was the trigger?
Yeah, I mean, the trigger is seeing the anxiety, the depression, the suicide. And as a military commander, these kids are really struggling. I felt that writing a book and getting some ideas out there as a start, doing nothing was not an option. So just going to work every day and pretending like everything's okay and watching another suicide and just doing the same thing over and over was not the answer. So what can I do different, or what can I do to help contribute to fixing this problem? And that's why I wrote the book. So I had a long talk with my wife, and she's she definitely has all the great ideas, and I just doing nothing was not an option. So this is me doing something.
What is the root cause of suicide? And is the suicide you're talking about mostly among Gen Zs or in general?
Yeah, and unfortunately, it hits all walks of life, all socioeconomic status, all ages. When you see it in some younger kids, I mean, you see a lot of suicidal ideations. Kids that come in. I've had a few. I haven't personally seen one younger than about 13 or 14, but it's terrible. There's a stigma attached with mental health that's unnecessary. I mean, it's just like any other disease process. It doesn't matter how big you are or strong you are, or you're a special forces operator and you have just you're tough as nails with the mental and physical capabilities above anyone else on the planet. They still have suicides. Everybody has a breaking point. Life happens, things happen. I mean, you lose a loved one or a spouse, or there's a car accident or a drunk driver kills somebody that you love. Everybody has a breaking point. It doesn't matter how much money you make or where you come from. So it's really important to address those issues and talk about it and let people know what those resources are. I take a tremendous amount of pride as an emergency physician being that stopgap. People come in when they're at their wit's end and they don't know what to do. I take a lot of pride in being part of that safety net, for the country. And I've worked overseas as well, Australia, New Zealand. I have an Irish medical license. I haven't worked in Ireland yet, but it's a terrible disease, and I've seen, unfortunately, just what I do as a career. I see a lot of it, so I see people kind of in their worst moments and try to help where I can.
So, among younger kids, is online bullying or bullying at school one of the main reasons for suicide? I mean, that's at least what I've been reading.
You will definitely the online bullying, and then that social media. There's lots of positives to it, but that's definitely one of the negatives. When I was a kid growing up, to bully somebody, you had to walk up to them, you punch them in the nose, ask them for their lunch money. Now they can be bullied 24/7, and when I've said, perception is reality for these kids, that's all they know. So in that generation that's been raised with that, that's their reality, that's their world. And for me, it's like, hey, it's some Yahoo online, it doesn't mean anything. Well, for them it does, and it's just they can't get away from it, and then more kids pile in on it. And I've seen, and my wife's a teacher and administrator in school now, and you'll see how easy someone can just try to make someone's life hell, just online. You get a couple of kids, band them together, and kids can be pretty mean. When I was a kid, making fun of people that have different disabilities or come from different walks of life. I grew up in a really rural, small town. I mean, now they can just jump online and just, you see all these Twitter trolls, like these people that post just horrific things online. Like, I can't imagine anybody would walk up to someone's face and say that. But if you're online and you start typing on a keyboard, like, people say the most horrific things. Like, my goodness. So that's their reality.
So you mentioned that they're like the positive aspect of or attributes of Gen Z, or their strengths. What are their strengths, and what makes them different than other generation? And if they want to play to their strengths, what makes them different? Yeah,
in embracing technology.
Okay.
All these new changes. This is what they've grown up with and known. And there's a chapter in my book that I titled "Confidence of Youth." And what youth brings to the table is, you get like these 40 and 50-year-old executives and business leaders. It tend to be a little bit stuck in their ways. And, who you are as a person and who you are as a leader is really predicated upon the last 20 or 30 years of your life, right? You can't just kind of change how you think at that age. And so when you have someone, when you take the US space race is the example I used. So in the 1960s, the average age in mission control for NASA, the team that put man on the moon, was 27 years old. That's mind-boggling. I mean, today you have some engineer probably at least in their 30s, if not their 40s, but they can tackle tasks that they don't know can't be done. So you give me a task at 47 years old, and I've probably seen that fail a couple of times, and I'm going to be jaded by that. You sometimes lose that objectivity where a younger generation, they don't know that they're not supposed to be able to do it.
Yeah.
And so they're not over. The biases aren't there. Sometimes that lack of that fear of failure, they just jump right into it. So that's a very positive thing. And that type of thought process literally put man on the moon. It was a bunch of 27-year-old kids in mission control. That was the average age. It's mind-boggling.
Yeah. So what's the average age now at NASA?
Oh, I don't know. I'm going to venture to guess it's higher than 27.
Okay.
I'm going to take a guess. I bet it's in the 30s.
Oh, okay, interesting. What caused the shift, you think?
Oh, in the 1960s, I mean, NASA was very new. I mean, there wasn't anybody that could have been in space engineering for more than a couple of years, right? So everything was very new. And there was a gentleman named Steve Bales who was basically an engineer that manned the computer systems, and computers were extremely new.
Yeah.
I mean, we have more computing power in our phones that we hold in our hands today than put man on the moon in those projects.
Oh, wow.
So, the technology didn't exist for anybody older than that to have any experience with it whatsoever. And so obviously we're like 50, 60 years past that time now. So I would imagine it's probably a much more aged population that has that experience. But in the 1960s, nobody had it. So just these young kids coming straight out of college. So that probably had a lot to do with it.
Huh. Okay, I want to go back to the book. What was the reaction that you got from the book after you published it?
It's been a very positive reaction. I've been very pleasantly surprised because you really put your heart and soul into something, and you want to make a difference. I mean, nobody spends a whole year and a half of their life to write a book just for the fun of it. I'm sure there are. There's probably some very artistic people out there, but I was doing it with a purpose. And you throw it out there, and you hope people care, and they have. So there's been several awards already: Independent Press, Nonfiction Writers Association. There's a New York City Big Book Award. It's been a very positive response. It's now award-winning, best-selling. It was an Amazon bestseller, hit #1. So I've been very fortunate. I feel very blessed, and it's something I really believed in and put a lot of time into it. And it feels very good that people have cared. So I've been approached by a lot of people that have read the book at a lot of events, have done some book signings, and they've talked with their kids, or they've had their kids read it, and it's I've been very, very happy.
Congrats. So how did you market the book? What is your best marketing advice for someone who wants to publish a book? And
Yeah. So that's something else that I learned almost completely on my own, and using some of the resources. So, you can always start off with, like Facebook and Instagram. I've had a lot more success with Amazon, so using their advertising resources, and then Ingram Spark, who is the printer for the book. So Ingram Spark has some great resources. So I started doing, and had the best results as far as sales with using the Ingram Spark. And they do Facebook and Google advertising. That goes through their, they have like 3 or 4 different services. They do some mailers and some emails. Kirkus Reviews had done some through there as well. So there's lots of different avenues to go through. Being very careful though. As soon as you put a book out, there's a lot of almost predatory services out there that you can tell they're just big money grabs. So those services I had the best results with.
Did you hire anyone to help you with the marketing?
I did. There was a couple of individuals I hired after going to a book fair. That was very helpful. So there's a book camp that's put out every year. Gabby Olzak, I'll put a shout out for them. Ted and Gabby Olzak did a great job. And I knew nothing about any of the marketing until I'd gone to that book camp. So if people want to Google that, that was a great course where I just kind of learned about the whole process, learned how to do an audiobook as well. So we got the audiobook out with ACX. And now we've got the ebook and the audiobook. So yeah. So it was a learning process, though. I mean, I'm a doctor. I'm not. I was never an author, so as a first-time author, there was lots to learn.
Great. So for anyone who's listening or watching, how can they reach you? If they want to buy your book, get in touch with you, how can they reach you?
Yeah, books available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. The audiobook is anywhere you can buy books. It's on there. And specifically, you can go to my website, weightbehindthespear.com. So WEIGHT, weightbehindthespear.com.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Josh, for joining us today. And for anyone who's listening or watching, thank you for joining us for another episode of Read and Write with Natasha. And until we meet again.
Natasha, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you for tuning in to Read and Write with Natasha. I'm your host, Natasha Tynes. If today's episode inspired you in any way, please take the time to review the podcast. Remember to subscribe and share this podcast with fellow book lovers. Until next time, happy reading, happy writing.